I mean, it occurred to me from the age 39 on, and why it occurred to me that late is already a problem. I mean, I wish that it had occurred to me when I was like 25, but I came to it when I came to it.
The news felt like a heartbreak Hollywood wasn't ready for. On October 11th, 2025, the world lost Diane Keaton, the woman who made imperfection magnetic and turned honesty into art. Her passing left a silence that stretched far beyond the screen. But what truly stunned everyone wasn't just her death. It was Al Pacino's confession, the man who shared 15 years of love, friendship, and undeniable chemistry with her, quietly admitted, "I'll regret for the rest of my life not marrying Diane. She was the greatest love of my life." For decades, their connection was a mystery, too real for gossip, too deep for Hollywood to define. And now, her passing has reopened a love story that never found its ending. Because when it comes to Diane Keaton, the question isn't just how she died, it's what and who she left behind. Stay until the end, because by the time this story is over, you'll understand why even Al Pacino still calls her the one that got away. It was a quiet Saturday in Los Angeles. The sun had barely risen, painting soft gold across the hills, when an emergency call came in at 8:08 a.m. Just 3 words: person down. No one on that dispatch line realized they were being sent to the home of one of Hollywood's most beloved icons. Inside Diane Keaton's house, everything was still. Her books, her notes, her half-finished journal entries, all untouched. When paramedics arrived, they found her surrounded by sunlight in the same cozy room where she often read scripts and wrote ideas for stories she never got to finish. There were no signs of struggle, no chaos, just calm. The kind of peace that only comes when someone has made peace with their life. By the time the ambulance pulled away, the neighborhood remained silent. There were no flashing lights or reporters at the gate, only the faint hum of wind moving through the trees. The same trees Diane had planted years earlier when she moved into what she called her sanctuary of imagination. A few hours later, the world found out what her closest friends already feared. Diane Keaton had passed away at the age of 79. The cause was not immediately revealed. Her family asked for privacy, saying only that she had experienced a sudden health decline. But in truth, Diane had been quietly battling health challenges for years, the kind she never wanted the world to see. As Hollywood began to react, social media filled with tributes, disbelief, and gratitude, directors, actors, and fans all said the same thing in different words: there will never be another Diane Keaton. But as the condolences poured in, one question lingered beneath the heartbreak. Who was really there in her final moments? And what had she been facing behind closed doors? The official statement came later that afternoon. It was brief and graceful, exactly what you'd expect from someone who lived her life with quiet dignity. Diane Keaton's family confirmed her passing and thanked everyone for their kindness, asking that people remember her not through speculation, but through the joy she brought to the screen. They didn't share details about the cause of death, only mentioning a sudden health decline. That silence wasn't avoidance, it was respect, a final act of privacy from a woman who had always valued her peace more than publicity. Within hours, the world was in mourning. News outlets across the globe ran tributes, and social media filled with her timeless smile. The tilted fedora, the quick laugh, the spark that made imperfection magnetic. Clips from Annie Hall, The Godfather, and Something's Gotta Give began circulating again, each one reminding people that Diane wasn't just an actress, she was a presence. Fellow stars remembered her with genuine affection. Woody Allen called her the most original person he had ever known. Nancy Meyers said Diane carried a warmth and wit that couldn't be taught. Bette Midler posted a single line that summed up what many felt: Diane was sunshine disguised as sarcasm. Her fans, though, mourned differently. To them, Diane wasn't just a Hollywood name. She was a mirror. She made people feel seen. Through every clumsy laugh, every imperfect romance, every moment of courage in her roles, she taught people that it was okay to be real. Still, something about her passing felt sudden, almost too quiet. She hadn't been seen much in recent months. Her interviews had grown rare, her social media posts had slowed, and the woman who once filled rooms with humor and energy seemed to have slowly slipped away. And behind that silence was a truth only her closest friends knew: that Diane had been facing a difficult fight with her health, one she kept hidden to protect the peace she had worked her entire life to build. Hollywood lost a legend that day, but what few realized was that Diane Keaton's final act wasn't on camera. It was the quiet grace with which she said goodbye to the world. For most of her life, Diane Keaton never tried to hide the fact that she had scars, but she didn't let them define her either. Long before her passing, she had spoken openly about two battles that shaped who she was, one physical, the other emotional. She called them her lifelong companions, reminders that fame doesn't make you immune to pain. Her first battle began in her 20s when she was diagnosed with basal cell carcinoma, a form of skin cancer that would return throughout her life. She underwent multiple procedures over the years and became an outspoken advocate for sun protection, often warning fans to take care of their skin long before it became a trend. "It's followed me all my life," she once said in an interview, with that trademark honesty that made people listen. Even as she got older, she carried that awareness with quiet courage, always reminding others to laugh at life, but never at their health. The second battle was one she fought mostly in silence, her struggle with bulimia. It began in her early acting days when Hollywood's expectations for women were cruelly rigid. Diane admitted she would sometimes eat tens of thousands of calories a day, then purge in secret, a cycle she called the lowest point of my life. Therapy helped her recover, but she often described herself as a work in progress, aware that healing isn't a single moment, but a lifetime of effort. That brutal honesty about mental health, especially back then, made her one of the few stars who dared to say what everyone else hid. In the final years of her life, close friends began to notice changes. Diane looked thinner, more fragile, though her smile never faded. She still wore her hats and oversized glasses, still cracked jokes in interviews, but those who knew her best sensed something deeper, a kind of quiet exhaustion that she tried to disguise with laughter. Then, in early 2025, something shifted. She put her Los Angeles home on the market, the same home she had lovingly designed and featured in her book, The House That Pinterest Built. Priced at nearly $29 million, the listing raised eyebrows. She had always called that house her sanctuary, her favorite place to write, think, and dream. Selling it felt symbolic, like she was closing one of the most personal chapters of her life. Friends later revealed that she had grown weaker in the months that followed. The daily walks she loved became rare. The energetic sparkle she once brought to every conversation began to fade. Still, Diane refused to let anyone worry. She didn't want to fuss. One friend said she just wanted to be remembered as herself. By the time autumn arrived, her health had declined faster than anyone expected. But in true Diane Keaton fashion, she faced it her way. Quietly, gracefully, and with her trademark sense of humor intact until the very end. Behind the scenes, she wasn't preparing for death. She was preparing for peace. 3 days after her passing, on October 14th, a quiet ceremony was held to honor Diane Keaton's life. There were no red carpets, no flashing cameras, and no public announcements, just the sound of wind through olive trees and waves rolling against a secluded stretch of California coast. It was exactly how she would have wanted it, simple, intimate, and far away from the noise of Hollywood. The service took place in a small seaside garden surrounded by sunlight and greenery. Instead of elaborate flower arrangements, there were sprigs of lavender taken from her own garden, a nod to her love for simplicity and nature. Guests sat on wooden chairs beneath soft linen canopies as a single piano played the theme from Annie Hall, the melody Diane once described as the laughter of my soul. Her children, Dexter and Duke, sat in the front row, hands intertwined. When it came time to speak, Dexter stood first. Her voice trembled, but her words carried strength. Mom taught us that life is a comedy, sometimes clumsy, sometimes painful, but always worth the applause. Her brother Duke followed, speaking about the afternoons they spent together, laughing at home, surrounded by books, hats, and the smell of fresh coffee. She built a world for us that felt like a movie, he said quietly. There were no grand eulogies, no speeches about fame or awards, only stories, the kind that make people smile through their tears. Bette Midler and Goldie Hawn attended together, holding hands as they listened. Woody Allen sat toward the back, quiet and pale, holding a folded piece of paper he never read aloud. A few rows behind them sat Francis Ford Coppola and Robert De Niro, both men who had known Diane since her earliest days on The Godfather. Coppola spoke briefly, his voice heavy with emotion. She had a way of making everything human, even the impossible. When the piano music stopped, the crowd sat in silence for nearly a minute. The sound of seagulls filled the air as guests placed single lavender stems beside her urn, each whispering their final words before walking away. But one name was missing from that garden, one man whose absence spoke louder than any speech ever could. Al Pacino never came, and his silence would soon reveal the most heartbreaking part of Diane Keaton's story. When word of Diane's passing reached Al Pacino, those who knew him said he went completely still. He didn't speak, didn't call anyone, didn't appear in public. The man known for his fire, for the voice that could fill any room, had gone silent. And in that silence lived a kind of grief that words couldn't touch. For decades, Al Pacino and Diane Keaton had shared something far deeper than a typical Hollywood romance. They met in 1971 on the set of The Godfather, when both were still chasing their dreams and had no idea they were about to create a legacy that would define cinema. Their chemistry was instant, their connection undeniable. What began as two actors playing lovers slowly blurred into something real, a bond built on late-night rehearsals, laughter between takes, and the kind of admiration that never really fades. But their love wasn't simple. Diane wanted stability, a home, something lasting. Pacino wanted freedom, consumed by his craft, lost in the chaos of fame. She once told him softly, "Marry me, or we break up." And he chose to walk away. Years later, he would admit the decision haunted him more than any role he ever played. When Diane died, that old regret came rushing back. Friends say Pacino spent hours sitting alone in his home, flipping through photographs of them on set. Diane in her hats, grinning between scenes, her laughter echoing from decades ago. He still kept her letters, her notes, and a silver bracelet she had given him one Christmas. To him, those weren't memories. They were pieces of the only woman who had ever truly understood him. He didn't attend the funeral, not out of disrespect, but because he couldn't bear it. He told a close friend, "I want to remember her the way she was, alive, laughing, impossible to forget." For Al Pacino, grief wasn't about showing up in public. It was about holding on in private. In his own way, he had said goodbye years earlier during the AFI Lifetime Achievement Tribute when he looked across the room and told Diane, "I will love you forever." At the time, it sounded like sentiment. Now it sounds like truth. Even after half a century of fame, awards, and legendary performances, it was clear. The role that left the deepest mark on Al Pacino's life wasn't Michael Corleone. It was Diane Keaton. For Diane Keaton, love was never a failure. It was a lesson. When her relationship with Al Pacino ended, she didn't fall apart. She rebuilt. She redirected her love into something that lasted longer than any romance ever could. Her art, her children, and her life on her own terms. Unlike most Hollywood stories, hers didn't revolve around a man. It revolved around meaning. In her 50s, when many actresses were being told their careers were fading, Diane was just getting started. She adopted 2 children, Dexter and Duke, and built a home that overflowed with laughter, books, and creativity. She cooked, painted, redecorated, and directed, turning ordinary days into works of art. She often said, "I never needed a man to feel complete. I have my children, and that's enough to the public." She was quirky and eccentric, always wearing gloves, hats, and layered outfits that made her unmistakable in a crowd. But to those who knew her, that style wasn't a costume. It was confidence, a reminder that she didn't need to blend in to belong. She was the definition of authenticity. Over time, her independence became her legacy. She broke every rule Hollywood placed on women. She didn't marry, didn't chase trends, didn't apologize for aging, and didn't pretend to be perfect. Instead, she showed that a woman could be powerful without being loud, beautiful without being polished, and loved without being owned. Even in her final years, Diane was still working. She continued writing, designing, and mentoring young actresses who looked up to her. Many of them described her not as a legend, but as a mentor, someone who made success feel human. She didn't lecture, she listened. She didn't show off, she encouraged. In a world obsessed with attention, Diane Keaton's quiet confidence became her superpower. She taught millions that true happiness doesn't come from applause or validation. It comes from knowing exactly who you are and choosing to stay that way, even when the world tries to change you. And maybe that was her greatest act of rebellion. She didn't need to be remembered as someone's wife, someone's muse, or someone's regret. She wanted to be remembered as herself, honest, imperfect, and free. Even in death, Diane Keaton remained true to herself, private, thoughtful, and intentional. She had planned everything quietly, just as she had lived. Her estate was carefully organized through a family trust, ensuring that her 2 children, Dexter and Duke, would be protected and provided for without the chaos of public legal battles. She never cared for extravagance, but she understood responsibility, and that sense of order, even in her absence, was her final gift to them. Her financial success was remarkable, not because she chased it, but because she created it. Over the decades, Diane had built a fortune through acting, directing, writing, and an unexpected passion, architecture and real estate. She was known for buying historic homes, restoring them with care, and turning them into works of art. One of her most famous creations, the Brentwood estate she purchased for $4.7 million and later listed for $28.9 million, became a symbol of her eye for beauty and detail. She once said that designing a home was like directing a story you get to live in. Beyond property, her career had secured her millions in royalties from films like The Godfather, Annie Hall, and Something's Gotta Give. Yet, despite her success, Diane remained modest. She lived with intention, never flaunting, never chasing the spotlight. Friends often described her as a minimalist trapped in a maximalist industry. In her will, Diane left most of her assets to Dexter and Duke, along with a small but meaningful portion designated for charities supporting mental health and women in film, 2 causes she quietly supported for years. Those who knew her said this was typical Diane, generous but never performative. She didn't want headlines about donations or monuments in her name. She just wanted her actions to speak for her. Even her funeral arrangements reflected that mindset. No massive public event, no media spectacle, just the people she loved most, in the kind of setting that made her feel at peace. Sunlight, laughter, and stillness. Diane Keaton's story ended the same way she lived it, with control, grace, and meaning. Her passing wasn't about tragedy, it was about closure. She left behind a blueprint of how to live freely, love deeply, and exit quietly, without ever losing yourself in the process. In the end, Diane Keaton's story wasn't about loss, it was about choice. She chose to live authentically, to love deeply, and to stay true to herself in an industry built on imitation. That's what made her unforgettable. Her films made us laugh and cry, but her life taught us something far greater, that you don't have to fit in to leave a mark. Diane proved that aging can be fearless, love can be free, and happiness comes from knowing who you are. And as for Al Pacino, his silence after her passing said everything. Some loves don't end. They just live on quietly in memory, untouched by time. Diane Keaton didn't just make movies, she made meaning. And that's why, even now, her story still feels alive. If you found this story powerful, make sure to subscribe for more untold Hollywood legacies, stories of love, loss, and the truth behind the stars we thought we knew.